The murmurs inside the chapel swelled like a tide no one could hold back. Candles flickered, shadows danced, and yet her world felt darker than ever. Amelia's hands trembled as she clutched her bouquet, the petals bruising beneath her grip. Each second dragged heavier than the last, the clock chimming in her chest louder than the violin that had long since stopped playing. Her groom had not arrived. 10 minutes turned to 30, 30 turned to nearly an hour. Guests shifted in their seats, whispering behind polite hands, but no whisper was quiet enough to escape her ears. She stood frozen, her white gown heavy as stone, her breath sharp and uneven. Somewhere deep down, she already knew he was not coming. Her closest friend tugged at her sleeve, begging her to step aside, but Amelia couldn't move. She stared at the chapel doors as if they held the only answer she needed. If she blinked, she feared she'd miss him bursting through, smiling, apologizing, explaining. But the silence of those doors was merciless. Her chest tightened, her throat burned. She had imagined this day since she was a little girl, and now it was crumbling before her eyes. Then, suddenly, the double doors swung open with a force that sent the crowd gasping. Sunlight spilled across the floor, framing a tall figure in its glow. He didn't hesitate, didn't glance at anyone else. His eyes locked only on her as he walked forward with steady steps. When the room had fallen completely silent, his voice carried through the air, deep and certain. "I'll marry you." Asterisk gasps rippled across the chapel, bouncing from wall to wall like a storm breaking loose. Amelia's bouquet slipped from her hands, white petals scattering over the marble floor like pieces of her broken heart. Her breath caught, but no words would come. She stared at the man standing before her, tall and composed, his eyes holding a kind of fire that silenced the crowd. He was a stranger, yet there was something about him that made her pulse quicken, not fear, but something unexplainable, something that pulled her attention when all she wanted was to collapse. The officiant stammered, searching for protocol, but the man spoke again before anyone could move. "No one deserves to be abandoned in front of the world," he said, his voice steady, carrying across every pew. His words weren't a plea, but a declaration. Amelia's friend rushed to her side, whispering urgently, "Don't listen. He's mad. Let's go." But Amelia couldn't step away. Her legs wouldn't obey. There was something in his tone, not arrogance, not pity, but conviction. The kind that came from scars no one could see. The crowd buzzed with disbelief. Someone muttered, "Who is he?" Another whispered, "This is madness." Yet the man's eyes never left Amelia's. He had interrupted her greatest humiliation, not to take advantage, but to stand where no one else dared. In that moment, with her whole world collapsing, the chapel itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what Amelia would do next. The silence that followed felt heavier than stone. Every pair of eyes in the chapel pressed against Amelia, waiting for her to speak, to move, to do anything that could break the spell this stranger had cast. Her throat ached, but no sound came. The man stood unwavering, his words still echoing in the vaulted ceiling. "I'll marry you." She wanted to believe it was a cruel joke, yet there was no trace of mockery in his face. His gaze was steady, as though he carried a truth too deep for laughter. Amelia's mind raced, flashes of her past with the groom who had vanished replaying like shattered film reels. Late-night promises, letters tucked beneath her door, the soft assurances of forever that now mocked her. She remembered the long nights working 2 jobs to help him chase his dreams, the way she silenced her own doubts just to believe in their love. And here she stood dressed in white, humiliated, abandoned. The stranger took one step closer, not invading, but offering. "You deserve more than empty vows," he said softly, almost like he was speaking only to her, though the whole church heard. Amelia's best friend clutched her hand, whispering, "Please, let's go. This isn't real." Yet deep inside, Amelia felt a spark she couldn't explain. It wasn't about marrying a man she didn't know. It was about standing at the edge of despair and hearing, for the first time in her life, someone say she was worth more. And just as the thought took root, a voice from the front row sliced through the silence, sharp, furious, demanding, "Who are you to say such a thing?" The confrontation was only beginning. The voice cut through the chapel like a blade, and all heads turned toward the woman who had spoken. It was the groom's mother, her expression cold, her voice trembling with outrage. "This is an insult. Who are you to interfere in a sacred day that doesn't belong to you?" Her words echoed, laced with bitterness and disbelief. Murmurs followed, some agreeing, some too stunned to speak. Amelia felt her knees weaken, but the stranger did not flinch. He turned his gaze toward the furious woman, calm yet unyielding. "I am the man who showed up," he replied, his tone steady but edged with steel. A hush swept over the crowd, so sharp it seemed the walls themselves leaned in to listen. The statement wasn't loud, but it carried weight, slicing through the judgment that filled the room. Amelia's heart pounded as if it would tear free from her chest. She wanted to protest, to say she didn't even know his name, yet her voice failed. Her mind was torn between shame and a strange, rising flicker of strength, kindled by his certainty. He didn't know her, yet he stood against a sea of scorn, against tradition, against the humiliation pressing her down. The officiant wrung his hands nervously, whispering about rules and legality, but the stranger's eyes never left Amelia. "You don't have to decide now," he said softly. His words meant only for her, though the whole room strained to hear. "But don't let this moment define your worth. You are not broken. You are not abandoned. You still have a choice." The words struck deeper than she expected, reaching places inside her that had been silent for years. And just as Amelia steadied herself, the chapel doors creaked again. Every head whipped around, and a collective gasp escaped the crowd as a familiar figure stepped inside. The doors groaned as they swung open, and every breath in the chapel seemed to vanish. Amelia's heart lurched, her hands gripping the edge of the podium as her eyes widened. Standing in the doorway was Caleb, the man who had promised forever, the man who had left her standing in silence for what felt like an eternity. His hair was disheveled, his tie loosened, his face flushed as if he had run miles to get there. Gasps rippled through the guests, some whispering relief, others exchanging doubtful glances. "Amelia," he called, his voice raw, reaching for her as if distance alone could erase the hour of abandonment. "I can explain." His words cracked, but no apology could mend the sight of him arriving only after another man had already stepped forward in her defense. The stranger did not move, his shoulders squared, his presence unshaken. He stood like a barrier, not between Caleb and Amelia, but between her pain and the weight of excuses about to fall upon her again. Caleb's mother rushed toward her son, clutching his arm, triumphant. "There, you see, he's here. This foolishness can end now." But Amelia's breath came sharp, uneven. Her mind spun, torn between the man she had once loved with her whole being and the stranger whose words had lit something deep within her, a truth she hadn't dared to believe, that she deserved better than broken promises. The chapel was no longer a place of celebration. It had become an arena of choices. Every guest leaned forward, their faces tight with anticipation. Caleb stepped closer, desperation etched in his features. "Please, give me a chance. Don't throw this away." The stranger's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm as he said, "The only one who has thrown anything away is you." Amelia's pulse thundered in her ears as both men stood before her, one begging for forgiveness, the other offering dignity. The room waited, breathless, for her answer. The chapel seemed to collapse into silence, though hundreds of breaths filled the room. Amelia's fingers trembled against the fabric of her gown as Tapas stood before her, the man she had once believed was her forever, and the stranger who had stepped into her brokenness with words that carried strength instead of excuses. Caleb's eyes pleaded, wide with regret, while the stranger's gaze remained steady, offering no promises of perfection, only the truth that she was worthy of more than what she had endured. Her chest tightened as memories crashed over her, the nights she cried alone, while Caleb chose work over her presence, the forgotten anniversaries, the empty reassurances that left her questioning her own value. She had silenced her doubts for years, convincing herself that love was supposed to hurt, that patience was proof of loyalty. But now, standing beneath the floral arch, surrounded by eyes that judged and whispered, she saw with piercing clarity. Love was not supposed to leave her abandoned. In her most vulnerable moment, Caleb stepped closer, voice trembling. "Amelia, please, I was wrong, but I'm here now. We can fix this." His words hung heavy, but they felt hollow, like paper in the rain. Then came the stranger's quiet voice, carrying the weight of conviction. You don't owe anyone your silence. You don't owe anyone your suffering. You owe yourself the chance to be loved fully, without conditions. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but they no longer felt like defeat. She straightened, shoulders trembling yet firm, her voice breaking the stillness at last. I will not go back to being invisible. One choose myself. The crowd erupted in shock, some gasping, others stunned into silence. Caleb froze, his hand suspended mid-air, as Amelia stepped away not into the stranger's arms, but into her own strength. The man bowed his head respectfully, his lips curving with the faintest trace of pride. He had not come to rescue her. He had come to remind her she could rescue herself. The candles flickered brighter, as though the room itself exhaled. And for the first time in her life, Amelia walked down the aisle not as someone's abandoned bride, but as her own beginning, free, whole, and unafraid of the life that awaited her.